Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Conservative Corner. I'm Elliot Margolis, and I'm here with my new co-host, Mike Chisano. Now, you might say, what do you mean new co-host? Well, he's new because he's the first time he's been on the show, but Gail couldn't make it today, so he's my pinch hitter. Welcome to the show, Mike.
Glad to be here.
Mike, this morning when we were having breakfast, you were telling me a story about your grandchildren. And let's talk about that, because
Sure.
I thought that was a really interesting thing to bring up on the show.
Yeah, well, my son lives in New Orleans, Louisiana. He came up here he runs a company, a software company. It's got about 10 employees. They're all over the United States, one's in Canada. So they have an all-hands meeting once in a while. He rented a Airbnb mansion in Belmont, and the team came in from various places. Well, his wife also has a career. She was busy, so they had 2 children. They didn't know what to do with the kids. So they said, would you watch them for the week while he has his team meeting? And my wife and I said, yeah, sure, it'd be a good chance. And we took them for a week, and this was last week. It worked out very well. We had no real trouble with the kids. They're well-behaved children.
How old are they?
They're 8 and 6. They both are going to a church school now, actually, and before that, they were going to a Hebrew school in New Orleans. Interesting. So, anyway, we take them for a week. We go to the Topsfield Fair. They see the 2,400-pound pumpkin, all kinds of the pig race, and all the stuff they had there. And they were fascinated by all of that. And back at the house, we had all kinds of activities. They into birds in our backyard, because my wife, Catherine, has bird houses and bird feeders and so forth. So, to make a long story an epic, we give the kids up on Saturday, this past Saturday, to fly back to New Orleans. This morning, Catherine gets a long text message, and text is not usually, you don't put long text messages because of the difficulty of using the thumbs, but the text message is from the kid's mom. Her name is Sue, and she writes to Catherine, and I'm paraphrasing because I didn't get it. I'm paraphrasing. She said, can I please call you later when I get back from my work and my business? I want to know, what did you do with these kids the week? They are so much more polite than they are when we're with them. And they learned so many things that we never could teach them or knew to teach them and so forth. Some of this was kind of on the humorous side. For example, when they were sitting at a dinner table, when they were finished eating, we asked them to give permission to leave the table. I used to do this with my kids, and they got into the habit. And so now I guess the habit stuck. And so now when they're back in New Orleans, they're asking for permission to leave the table. Well, my son and his wife are astounded by this. They cannot figure out how did we do this? Did we have magic powder or something that came and we sprinkled on them that they got to be? And of course, the answer is no, it's nothing. You give an expectation to children, and then if you do it the right way, they'll meet it. Little Nico, the smaller one, the boy, he was quite used to, for example, at breakfast, he'd finish his cereal, and then he'd want some more. Well, he was used to saying, I want some more Rice Krispies. And Catherine would say, no, we don't ask it that way. We say, could you please give me some more Rice Krispies? He would do that. Well, he wasn't trying to be a smart aleck. He had never been asked to be polite. So there was his mom saying, wow, we need to learn more. So they're going to have a conversation about it.
All right, so what this brings to mind in my mind is that nowadays kids are not taught to respect parents, to respect police, to respect teachers, to respect anything. And all you were doing was going back to your years as a parent and saying, you know, I'm the boss, okay? Respect me. This is what we expect of you. And it's sort of like discipline in that, you know, in order to learn something, you've got to know the rules and abide by the rules. Otherwise, you don't get it. It's sort of like, I guess, you know, there's a difference between being a parent and being a friend.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think one of the lessons that my own children haven't learned, or they just never really thought about it, is that they think they're going to harm the child and cripple the child's ego and self-worth if they have rules or have expectations of the kid. And so they let the kid kind of run in whatever way they're going to run. And human nature, I mean, it's just the tendency is if you can get your mom to hand you something and you don't have to work for it, you'll sort of default to that position. And when they're called and the child is called on it, for example, we would say, you can do that yourself. You don't need us. Do that yourself. We're not going to get up and get a... And they, you know what? They do it. And then after a while, they don't even think about it.
Yeah.
And I think it's kind of... It's funny in a way, but it's sad too.
Would you say it's generational, or would you say it's more, you know, like kids are testing you, and they're testing to see what they can get away with, and once they see what they can get away with, they keep going further and further.
Yeah, sure. I mean, when my older daughter was a little three-year-old, she had one of these sippy cups with the weight in the bottom, so it wouldn't fall over, and I can remember this like it happened yesterday, and she's middle-aged now. She's 3 years old. She'd take that sippy cup, and you know, she had the seat, the kid's seat with the table on it. She would drop it on the floor, and Mom would pick it up, and then, on purpose, we'd say, now don't drop it on the floor. She would pick it up and drop it again. She was waiting. The child would keep doing it until the mom got, I guess you'd say, angry enough to say, I don't want you dropping that on the floor anymore. You better stop it. And then it would stop. So the tendency is to push the limits. I told you and Paul this morning, I said, when I think about some of the dumb things I did when I got my driver's license, oh man, I'm lucky I'm still alive with that car. Because you're young and you don't have a lot of common sense sometimes.
Okay, now let's take this, because, you know, I agree with you. I mean, but go into the schools, okay? Discipline is important for education. Without discipline, you don't get educated, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And it appears that since, quote unquote, the liberals have taken over the unions and the educational system, the numbers from our school system, not only Beverly, but I mean the United States in general, have gone down. We used to be one of the top education countries in the world, and now we're somewhere around 30th in the world. Do you think there's a correlation between discipline at home and discipline in the school and the lack of achievement?
Sure, I think we could argue that maybe a generation ago, maybe there was a little bit of an authoritarian overreach sometimes I don't know the answer to that. And so what you did, the pendulum kind of swung to the sort of a self-esteem that we have to constantly reward the child, never enforce any discipline, and never say they did anything wrong. And so I think in some ways, you know, the self-esteem movement ran amok to the point where the kid can do anything and they never suffer any negative consequence of it. And then it gets harder and harder for them to backpedal to correct these behaviors. And I think that's something that's happened over time, really decades probably.
It's decades, because I can tell you somewhere's ballpark 30, 35 years ago. Now I'm aging myself. But I just had a discussion with the school committee chairman of the city of Gloucester. And I said, why do you have social promotions? Okay? Why is it that whether a kid achieves a certain grade level or not, you promote them to the next grade? And his response was, well, if we don't, they won't feel good about themselves.
Well,
and that's detrimental to their personality, so to speak.
right.
My
right.
response was, well, if you don't have to earn it, you're not going to learn it. And if you give a kid an incentive to study, they're going to study. If they know they're going to stay back, they're going to study. If they know it doesn't matter,
Yeah.
then what difference does it make? Fell on deaf ears, but nevertheless.
Well, that's the whole idea of expectations. My son went to St. John's Prep, and the expectations there were pretty high. They expected you to do things. And you can push that too far, I think. You can get to be harsh or mean-spirited. But a gentle nudge, I think any parent with common sense gets this, you know, you can do it. Don't say you can't do it. I taught at a photography school at the end of my photography career. I taught at a school, and I used to get a kick out of, these were adults or 18, over 18 in any case, saying, well, I can't do Photoshop, it's too much computer, and I didn't accept that. I said, no, you can do this. I tell you what, we'll come in after the classes are over, I'll tutor you. You'll get through this. Because they were kind of, basically they were lazy. They didn't want to learn it. It did require some effort. And it was much easier to say, well, I'm just too dumb to do this. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, if you take incentives away from people for anything, then why work? And I see this when I go shopping now with the employees at the different stores, that they don't seem to care anymore. They know they're going to get their paycheck. They don't have to do anything. They're not trained well anyhow.
Yeah.
But they don't even care. You don't like it? Oh, well, tough.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, see, life will eventually catch up to you. The world is not that pleasant. And, yeah, you can live in your parents' basement and they can do your laundry and feed you food, but eventually they'll be gone, actually. And do you want to be 50 years old and a helpless human being?
And see, now let's take the next segue and say, look at our government, okay? The illegals coming into this country, okay? When they come into this country, they get medical checks, they get a telephone, they get food, they get clothing, they get everything just because they came in here illegally. And of course, our government doesn't understand the word illegal. So if we give them all this stuff and then we give them a social security check so that they can buy food or live and
Yeah.
we give them a place to live, where is the incentive for them to go to work?
Yeah, well, I think that's a real problem. You know, you make the welfare so generous, it doesn't make sense to to be productive. That's really what you're talking about.
Yeah.
I think we, of a conservative point of view, feel that it's not some cruelty to ask a person. I think work has dignity. It has dignity whether you're doing the most menial kind of work or the highest level kind of work. It all has dignity because it's not because you're suffering. It's actually building your
character.
yes. You're building your character, your value as a human being to be responsible to yourself and to the culture you live in.
So, like now we have a $15 an hour minimum wage. And some people are saying that's not enough. That's not a living wage. Well, you got to look at the consequences of your actions. If someone's making $15 and somebody that's been in a particular job, same job for say 10, 15 years, if you're going to give an increase to them, you've got to give a bigger increase to the people that have been there longer. That means it costs more money for the employer. What does that mean? That means it's going to cost more money to buy that product.
Yeah, I mean, it all accumulates. There's no free lunch.
It's the trickle up theory, not the trickle down theory. The trickle up theory.
Well, the other thing that's Thomas Sowell has pointed this out in his books about the minimum wage. It eliminates. See, minimum wage shouldn't be something that you stay in. It's an entry. It's an entry. I can remember when movie theaters used to have the kids. It would be a job that a 16-year-old would have a flashlight. He'd show you to your seat and that kind of a thing. And it was never intended that you would spend the rest of your life at that minimum. At that minimum level.
That's the whole thing. Where's the incentive to improve if you give people what's quote unquote a living wage to start with, and then what happens to everybody else? See, it's again, as I've mentioned many times on the show, consequences of your actions. You have to look at what you're doing and what are the consequences of those. And, if you take incentive away from people working, why work?
Well, that's like the old joke in the Soviet Union. We pretend to work and they pretend to pay us.
Yeah. And I think that's what our government is doing now.
Well, sure. I mean, it's. I think what we need is a little tough love, if you will. I mean, it's like your child. I mean, my wife gave these grandchildren jobs to do, which apparently their parents have never done. And we said, okay, you're going to go out in the garden, you're going to pull some weeds, we're going to move some stuff around, and for this you'll get money. What a neat concept this was. These kids say, money? And you say, yeah, and when you get enough money, we'll take you to the dollar store and you can buy whatever you want. Wow, I can buy whatever I want. I don't have to ask permission. Can I buy this? No, whatever. That's your money. You spend it the way you want. So Sue, their mom, has written to Catherine to circle around, coming back. She said, wow, I got to try this now. Give them jobs to do, and I'll pay them. And I kind of laughed because it was like one of those duh moments.
Yeah.
We all say, do people have newspaper routes? That kind of a thing.
Yeah, but I have to give Sue a lot of credit because she learned something from what you did with your grandchildren.
Yeah.
And she said, that's an improvement. I want to know how to do it. So
Yeah.
I give her a lot of credit for that.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it is to her credit. She, I guess, was never taught these things by her mom, who maybe spoiled her a bit or a lot.
And we all
I'm not
have
sure.
that tendency. I mean, the fact that we're grandparents, you want to spoil your grandchildren because you don't see them that much, but still you want them to be respectful.
Well, I think what's happened, ironically, is there's been a flip where it used to be the grandparents would buy the cotton candy and the junk food for the kids, And the parents would be the strict ones that said, no, we're going to have healthy eating and we're going to have, we're not going to ask you to do chores and so forth. Well, guess what? It's the other way.
It's the other way now.
It's the other way. The grandparents are the ones who are, my son came home, my son came to pick them up. He says, wow, you run a tight ship here. Like, well, not really. They're having a blast. And so because he's more lax.
But it reminds me, one time, one of my sons was, when he was here at Beverly High, he was supposed to do a science fair project. And I kept asking him, how's your project coming? How's your project coming? He says, it's coming fine. Okay?
Uh-oh.
So the report cards come.
I think I know where this is going.
The report card, he's an all-A student. The report comes, he's got all A's and 1 D
In the science project.
in the science thing. So I says, how did you get a D? I don't know. So I came to the school and I wanted to find out how we got the D. So I saw the science teacher, and the science teacher told me he didn't do his science fair project.
Uh-oh.
Okay? Now, he told me he had done it. So I was fine with that. I mean, he got A's on all of his tests, but the science fair was a higher percentage of the mark. I came home, I talked to him about it. Let's just say through the rest of his high school career, it was all A's again. He didn't like getting the D because he was used to getting all A's. He saw what he did wrong. We explained to him what he did wrong. The teacher was right. And by the way, sometimes teachers are right. Sometimes the little darlings do make mistakes.
Yeah.
And it was an education process for my son. And he benefited from it because he did
Yeah.
something wrong.
Well, he got a little tough love.
Yeah. And so that's the kind of thing that can happen.
Yeah, I think it's gotten a little too easy because everything is a big bureaucratic structure and so forth. Parents figure, you know what, I'll let the school take care of it. They're the experts and they know how to do these things, and then they don't pay attention to what's actually happening in the school. And I think that there's been a little bit of a wake-up call that has taken place where parents are figuring out that we got to keep an eye, because unfortunately there's a lot of polarization, a lot of politics has entered into schools and so forth, and parents need to be, I'm telling both of my children, keep an eye on what's going on at the schools, where you didn't have to do that as much.
Well, I think that's the one thing we can thank COVID for.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, because now that you're teaching on Zoom and the parents were learning what was going on at the schools, that's why Youngkin got elected governor of Virginia.
I got to tell you a story about that. When my son was still in Somerville, he lived in Somerville, and they were sending their kids to the public schools of Somerville. And it went virtual because of the COVID. And my son was watching the remote instruction. And his kid would say, I'm bored in school. But my son was watching the school lessons. He said to me, he said, Dad, I could teach what Ari is learning in the entire semester. I could do that in 3 weeks. There's nothing happening there. He was very upset because he was actually seeing the instruction. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what you're
That's what I'm referring to. And one of the things is, if you were looking at the schools, looking at the classroom, so many of the kids are playing with their phone instead of listening to the teacher.
Oh man, that's bad.
Okay, one of the things that I've gone into some charter schools. Charter schools are public schools paid for by the taxpayer, but they're non-union.
Right.
Okay, so all of a sudden there's discipline in the schools. The kids are in the class, they're listening to the teacher, raising their hand, and you have some decorum. That's why so many people are on a waiting list to get into a charter school, because they want their kids to learn, and they're finding out that in the public schools, that
Yeah,
are
I
not
mean,
charter schools, they're not learning.
There's no reason a public school can't be a tight, well-run school. No reason at all. And it's kind of sad that it hasn't.
Well, see, and part of that is the teacher can do no right and the kid can do no wrong. My little darling couldn't have talked back to you.
Yeah.
You know, that type of thing, and yet that's what they do at home. And,
You got it.
you know, education is discipline. And there's just no two ways around that.
I mean, you give discipline in the right way. It's a gift to the child.
And there's a reason why not one school committee member in the city of Beverly will come on this show to talk about it. Not one. They've all been asked. But they won't come talk about it because they don't want to be questioned on the way things are happening in the schools.
Yeah, I mean, it's public. I went to public school. I never went to private schools, and boy, it wasn't like it is now.
No. And if I did something wrong and I went home and told my parents, they'd be yelling at me, not at the teacher.
Oh, sure.
You know, it's a totally different
Teachers
thing
in public
now.
schools must be very disheartened, I would say.
It's a tough job.
You know,
I mean,
they're even subject to physical violence now.
and how do you teach a class when you've got 3 or 4 different languages in the classroom?
Yeah.
You know, first thing you should do before you get integrated into a classroom is learn English. Because English is our language. Now, the United States does not have an official language. We should. And it should be just like they do in Israel. You want to go to school in Israel, you learn Hebrew. They have what's called an ulpan, where you have intensive teaching of the Hebrew language. Then once you know Hebrew, you're in school. That's the way it's got to be in this. If you want education, we can only teach. It's nice to teach Spanish. It's nice to teach French or German. We should have a second language, but you need an official language. My opinion.
I agree. Otherwise, you get a Tower of Babel. I mean, I get the Tufts medical report, and on the back, there's about, I don't know, 30 different languages telling you how to get your medical treatment. You're entitled to a translator, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and you know who's paying for that? We are.
Yeah.
And it's a lot of paper, and it's a lot of.
Well, plus it furthermore it eliminates the possibility of coming to a common ground, which a common language gives you.
Right.
So you have a tribalism. Because I speak this language, you speak that language. We don't have a common culture anymore. We just have a bunch of tribes who are bickering at each other.
And we know how tribes work in Afghanistan.
Oh, yeah.
No, we know we need to be united, and we're not united right now, and that's a real problem. But you know, so there are problems that we can fix.
Oh.
These are fixable problems, and I've just been given the 1 minute mark.
Okay.
So we are now pretty much done, but I want to thank you for coming on to the show.
Well, it's been a pleasure.
This was an interesting discussion, I think. If anybody wants to give us some comments, you've got my email address. Hopefully it'll go on the screen. And email me, tell me what you thought of this or any other show that we've done, and we'll be happy to bring it up at the next show, because that's how we all learn. So thank you for watching, and we'll see you next time.